Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for tuning in again to another episode of a Wild Time podcast. This is probably going to be the last one of 2022, and what a guest to have on the final episode of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all. I'm just going to tell you, if you've seen this guy on a UFC, then it's pretty clear he's came out with one of the top guys in the division of the heavyweights, welterweights, light heavyweights. He has been the boxing trainer for Hall of Famers. Dude's played a little bit of basketball overseas in his younger days. I would like to give a warm welcome to a Wild Time podcast to my man, Ron Frazier. Ron, how's it going, buddy?
It's going, man. I feel I got a lot to live up to after that introduction. I don't know.
I'll never forget. I'll never forget, man. We was when Randy fought Chuck. I guess it was the third time, and
Yeah.
I'm a massive Randy Couture fan, and I can remember you warming him up on the mitts, and I was a nervous wreck. Anybody that had watched the fights with me knew what a big fan of Couture was, and I was like, man, he's got somebody back there. He's hitting mitts like I've never seen him hit before. I was tickled to death. I was like, Chuck's in for it this fight, and I'll never forget my sister-in-law saying, he may be the reason he gets his title back, and you went on to corner a lot of great guys, a lot of great fighters. And before we get into that chunk of the show, tell us a little bit about your basketball, because I got on there, man, and I read that you played some collegiate ball, went overseas and played, man. So it sounded like you had a pretty good little run.
Oh yeah, you know what? Basketball and boxing were my first loves, but let's go back a little bit further. I from a family of 7 kids. I have 4 older brothers, an older sister, and I have a younger sister. And because of my older brothers, they played football and baseball. So they always wanted me to take after them in that. In the neighborhood I grew up in, I was the youngest of the bunch of kids I hung out with by 2 and 3 years. And they played basketball and all that sort of stuff. So that's how I got into basketball. My dad owned restaurants. I got to meet Muhammad Ali, my hero, when I was 7 years old.
Wow.
And that introduced me to wanting to box. And then the Sugar Ray Robinson Youth Foundation went in there and started dabbling in boxing. And that was just a thing to do away from my brothers and away from everybody in the neighborhood because they were playing all the traditional sports. And Ali being a hero, and Ali was something that fights were something me and my dad kind of did together. We watched them together. That's kind of how I gravitated towards that. And then basketball, it wasn't. I loved football, but not the way I loved basketball. And basketball was one of those things I could go into my backyard and practice by myself. I didn't need anybody else around. I can count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and hit the game-winning jumper. And I interviewed myself too, so that's why I'm good in radio because I would hit the game-winning jumper, then I'd interview myself. They call that schizophrenia now, but it's worked out for me.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's funny you bring that up because, growing up, I was a big professional, which I'm a professional wrestler also, but kind of the way you did that with basketball on a trampoline and a pillow, I could go out back and I would have my own pay-per-views, kind of give myself promos of the crowd and work. So it's schizophrenia, what we got, Ron.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who's your favorite wrestler of all time?
My favorite wrestler of all time is Ravishing Rick Rude.
Oh, the Ravishing one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I like Rude. He was like the main reason I got in. I like the Great Muta. Do you remember him? He would blow the
I
mist.
remember Great Muta, the Green Mist. I was Mil Mascaris fan, the man of 1,000 masks and 1,000 holds. And then Ric Flair, but the old NWA Ric Flair when he was fighting Dusty Rhodes and Wildfire Tommy Rich and all those guys.
Tully Blanchard, member of the Horsemen, one of my favorite all time. Those guys, Barry Windham. Actually, I met Barry Windham and Ricky Steamboat and Jake Roberts about 2 months ago. And
all right.
And Barry had recently, it was probably 2 weeks after that, he had a severe heart attack, and he was down, and they didn't know if he was going to pull through. But Lord willing, I think he's back up and running right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just went on and played basketball and was fortunate enough growing up in Los Angeles. Magic Johnson I was a huge Laker fan. Magic Johnson comes to LA in '79. I was like 12 years old. By the time I was in high school, we would go up either to UCLA or to Westchester, and and that's where all the top guys would play. All the pros would come in, all the college guys, high school guys, and we would just sit on the auxiliary courts and shoot around and hoping we would get our name called by one of the big guys. And it happened a few times. I got to play on the court as a high schooler with Magic. And Magic was one of those dudes. This is how good he was. He wouldn't always pick other pros on his team. So it could be 5 pros on one team. He would pick a high school, maybe 1 or 2 high school players, a college player, and a pro player, and then hold court for 2 hours. Nobody would beat him. And he just gave you that confidence. And that I was just like, man, this is what I want to do. Always loved boxing. My mom hated boxing. She obviously, mothers don't want their kids getting punched in the face.
Oh yeah.
So, so I had to wrestle which way I wanted to go, and basketball went out, went and played overseas, and then when I retired before my dad passed away, I knew he was getting sick, and I come back to Vegas where they were living at the time, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna retire. I don't know what I want to do. I got into sports radio. While I was doing sports radio, met a guy by the name of Skipper Kelp. Skipper Kelp was once ranked number 2 by the WBA or WBC. He was in line to fight either Oscar De La Hoya or Felix Trinidad. Ended up taking a fight and losing, and that opportunity kind of passed him by. But he opened up the UNLV boxing program, and it's under USA Boxing, but it's a club sport on campus. He started that while I was doing sports radio. I would do commentating for his fights, and he was like, "Dude, boxing. You should train fighters." And I was like, "I don't want to train fighters." And he said, "No, you should train fighters." It took the Jedi mind trick about 3 or 4 years to work. But eventually, I started helping him out in training amateur boxers and pro boxers. And early, I think it was 2000, I want to say 3 or 4. Mike Pyle was at his gym. It was called JSEC at the time. John Lewis and Skipper Kelp owned that gym. If you know John Lewis actually doesn't get enough credit for helping the UFC get
Oh
along.
yeah, he was with the Tap Out brand, and John was a he was almost an icon of those early UFC
Oh,
days.
absolutely. The who's who of the UFC trained at his gym. And Skipper Kelp was also John Lewis's boxing coach. And he kind of took me under his wing. And one thing led to another. I started training Mike Pyle. Well, actually, I started laughing at Mike Pyle because he brought his cousin in to hold mitts for him. And his cousin's named Jimbo. They're from the Tennessee, Kentucky area. And I would always tease Mike about that. Well, anyway, if you have a cousin named Jimbo, you have to be from Tennessee or Kentucky.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I've got a father-in-law, and his name's Jim, and I've heard people call him Jimbo pretty regular.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, no, no.
So his cousin would try to hold mitts for him, and that wasn't going very well. So I would try to give his cousin pointers. So one, he didn't get hurt, and two, Mike could get something out of it. That wasn't working. So Mike one day said, "Hey, coach, can you hit mitts with me?" And I'm like, "Sure." That turned into me hitting mitts with him a couple times a week. Then he had this sad look on his face one day, and I was like, "What?" He's like, "I got a fight in 7 weeks. Can you train me?" And I was like, "You can't afford it." He's like, "What do you mean?" So I told him the price of my private lessons. He's like, "You're right. I can't afford it." I was like, "I know that. What do you need?" He's like, "I got a fight in 7 weeks and nobody to coach me. Can you hit mitts with me, 3 times a week for a half hour a day?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that. We'll work out the money part of it later. Don't worry about it." That turned out me training him 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. And into week 2, I'm at UNLV training all my amateur kids for boxing. So it's a Friday. Mike calls me and says, "Hey, can you open up the other gym early?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "What do you mean no?" I was like, "What? You were in Denmark so long you don't speak English anymore?" "No." He says, "Randy Couture wants to work out." I was like, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." Uh, Mike was fighting on a sport fight card in Oregon that Randy was co-promoting with Matt Lindland.
Seemed like I had the
State.
ADD to that, actually. I think Matt Linland brings in a pocket knife and gives it to Randy during the ceremony, I think.
He may have. He may have. Um, anyway, Mike wins his fight. I thank Randy for allowing me to stay in his house. I asked him, is there anything I could ever do to return his hospitality to let me know? He called me that Monday and said, I don't know if you know this, but I like the way you coach. I'm moving to Vegas and I need a boxing coach. And that's kind of how all this madness got started. But the big thanks go to Skipper Kelp, because while I was training up under him, Randy was coming through there, Forrest Griffin, Chuck Ledet. Chuck was already at his gym. Actually, I knew Chuck before I started training Randy. I'll tell you a story about that later.
Awesome.
Alex Schonauer, who was on season 1 of the Ultimate Fighter, Gray Maynard, who went on to fight for the lightweight title, was there. Jay Haran, who made his debut against GSP, Frank Trigg. Just kind of the who's who of fighters. But he sent me out the door. He said, those are your guys. And he had more experience in doing this. And he was like, no, you know what you're doing. You're good at what you do. Go do this. So my career and being able to train the great guys that I've trained was all thanks to Skipper Kelp. And then obviously Randy Couture gave me something that money couldn't buy, was that stamp of credibility. Like, if he's in Randy's corner and he's in Frank Trigg's corner, obviously there's something he's doing right. And then from that, I've got to train Rico Rodriguez, Johnny Hendricks, Vitor Belfort, that guy. Got to train him. Vanderlei Silva, who is one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet in your life, outside of sparring with him, where he goes 1,000%.
Oh gosh.
But he's so nice. Like, after he would spar, even obviously being at Xtreme Couture, people would start to gather around where all the fighters are training, and he would go introduce himself like nobody knew who he was. And it was like, bro, your nickname is the Axe Murderer, and you have tattoos in your head. People know who you are. But he was a tremendously nice guy.
What was Vitor when you held mitts for Vitor? I mean, he was so fast. I mean, that would frighten me to have to hold mitts for him as quick as he was.
Our quickness level is about on par. So Vitor is probably naturally maybe the most talented guy I ever trained.
Yeah.
He's just that good. He was just
He
that
was,
good.
you could
Fast
tell
hands.
at such a young age with him too, because like I said, I grew up, I mean, from the time I was 10-year old, I was watching UFC, Pride, everything. And when Belfort, like, it was like a different type of human being had entered the martial arts world with him. I had never seen I mean, he was 18 years old. I mean, treating grown men like he was just so lightning fast. And I mean, like you said, he naturally.
Yeah, it was just incredibly gifted. And a funny thing about Vitor, so before he knocked out Rich Franklin in Dallas, that punch he knocked out Rich Franklin with, he came within a millimeter of punching me with that same punch as I was holding mitts for him. Myself and the late Sean Tompkins was getting him warmed up in the back, and Sean was doing more of some grappling and more kicking and stuff with him. And then some of the stuff me and Vitor had just been working on specifically for that fight. I went in, I'm holding mitts, and he almost hits me with it. I slip it because my defense is really good.
Right.
And then Vitor pauses like, Coach, I got to get my mouthpiece. I'm like, what about my mouthpiece, Vitor? What about me, brother? And like, I hope you hit him with the same punch you almost decapitated me with. And he did.
He did. It dropped Franklin, man. He just went right down to his knees, and it was it.
And I was like, I was good. I was happy for that. It's like, you guys punch me all the time. Go hit the other people like you're hitting me. Randy would do it too. Randy is like so quiet and unassuming, great guy. Except the day before a fight. The day before the fight, he wants to hit mitts, and he doesn't care if I'm the coach. We do this thing called ground and pound mitts. Thanks to the late Robert Follis introducing that to me. He's like, yeah, let these guys take you down and hold mitts for them on the ground. Don't know if that's sound judgment now. Doing this 20 plus years, not sure if that was the smartest move I've ever made. These guys would miss the mitts and punch me.
Oh,
well,
shoot.
Randy in particular, one fight, I think it was right before he fought Brock Lesnar, he takes me down. He starts throwing elbows before I asked for them. And there was one in particular, I was like, he's going to cut me. Yep. But fortunately, I got the mid up in time. But right before that, they took a picture and they ended up putting that in one of the Everless magazines when he was sponsored by them.
Yeah.
And we had talked about it. A couple years later, we're looking at the magazine. He's like, Coach, what's that look? And I'm like, that's fear. He's like, what are you scared of? That elbow that you start throwing that I didn't ask for, that it wasn't going to hit the mid. It was going to hit me, and I was just going to bleed all over the mat. He's like, I didn't hit you that much. Like, you weren't supposed to hit me at all, not that much.
I got to see. I was looking at some pictures, man. You really started. A lot of the guys that had a lot of power, but were a lot of jujitsu guys. They came to you. It looked like Gabriel Gonzaga.
Yes,
Gonzaga. I seen you working with
another
him.
really talented dude, crazy talent. Um, just couldn't quite put it all together.
And I
But
hated that.
I trained him after he had fought Randy. He
Yeah.
come to our gym and I end up hooking up with him. Another nice guy, but it was so funny. So comes in and we're working together and we're doing the ground and pound mitts now. I've been up under a lot of big guys at this point. I've been up underneath Todd Duffy, been Frank Mir, a lot of huge guys where we've done ground and pound stuff, and I could move. Nope, Gabriel Gonzaga put me on lockdown. I could not move, and I'm like, what the hell is this? His hips were so good, and then after I held mitts for him, I walk into Randy's office like, I don't know how you beat him because on talent you should never beat this dude ever. But that was Randy. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
just that guy.
And I met, he was my hero. When I got into, I went on to fight some, and the way I conducted myself in mixed martial arts was totally different than pro wrestling. When it came to MMA, I was not a trash talker or try to pump a fight. I grew up watching Randy the way he would approach a fight. Study your opponent, come up with a good game plan. Don't go away from the game plan. Stick to it. And he's just the things he did, man, were things he shouldn't have been able to do, but he did it out of heart. And he's a very intelligent fighter. Always surrounded himself with the best people to help him prepare. That's why having you on here, man, was mind blowing to me.
Yeah, very cerebral. Like I said, talent wise, there's a lot of guys who are better than him. Vitor was better than him talent, but you see him beat Vitor 2 out of 3 times. Gabriel Gonzaga was physically more gifted than him. You saw him beat him, and he was just that guy that I knew he would never be mentally broke in a fight. You might beat him because you just got the best of him that day,
Yeah.
but he wasn't going to be mentally broke. And I can't say that about everybody else that I've trained who were some physically gifted fighters, but if things didn't necessarily go their way, they weren't necessarily on.
A
For
lot
the
of guys,
rest of
like you
those
said,
fights.
a lot of guys would check out. I mean, being mentally, but Randy, like you said, man, he may get caught and dropped or this and that, but like you said, you won't you won't outthink him, or his
No,
heart is on another level too.
absolutely. And the funny thing about that was, even though he lost to Brock Lesnar, had Brock not grabbed the cage, and he did it
He was
twice,
going down.
he was going down. And I think had he gone down, that fight would have been over because the whole stadium would have jumped in that cage and beat Brock up with Randy. I mean, it was just mind blowing. But Brock is so massive. At the time, I believe he was cutting down from like 280 to 265, and Randy barely weighed 220 pounds. Literally, I had at one point there were 4 light heavyweights in our gym heavier than the heavyweight champion of the world. Boris Griffin normally walked around in the high 220s, low 230s. Alex Schonauer from season 1 was in the high 220s, low 230s. Mike Whitehead was like cutting down from, he was fighting in heavyweight or light heavyweight. So sometimes he was as much as 255, cutting down to 205. And then the late Stephan Bonner, who came to train with us a little bit from time to time, was another big light heavyweight. So the heavyweight champion is walking around at 220, and I got light heavyweights bigger than him. That just shows you what kind of guy Randy was when he went into that cage.
Man, when he lost that third fight to Chuck and retired in the ring, I took off work for the next day. I was that heartbroken. But let me tell you something. I was in Columbus. I got tickets to Columbus. I
Sylvia.
was there the night when the roof on Nationwide Arena about came off, because that was the most, that's like you was talking about Magic Johnson. You got to be there and at his game. When I was there and that crowd was counting down from 10, when he dropped him with that, that inside leg, fake the inside leg, come with the overhand right, he fell. I've never been in a situation like that. Like, it was almost like a movie when everybody comes up and it's just, and I was there, and it was when Aerosmith kicked in and he came out, it was just perfect.
It was so loud we couldn't hear each other talk to one another. And then they started counting down from 30. I remember it. And I was like, because one of the security guards like, "Oh, coach, you got this." Like, these are heavyweights. I don't start counting until that final bell ends, because one punch and they don't even have to count and it could be over. But it was just amazing how that crowd, how loud it was. And we get spoiled here in Vegas because, in the fight capital of the world. So
Right.
for boxing and for MMA, people don't start showing up until the main events or the main card started to happen. In Columbus, they were at like 95% capacity for the prelims.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It was a big deal. One of my favorite fights and one of my favorite fighters happened earlier. Martin the Hitman Compton was out of Xtreme Couture, and he fought Drew McFedries that fight. And you're not having a good night when the boxing coach is yelling for you to take someone down. Means your hands are not doing what we thought. And and Drew was punching Martin all over that cage until Martin ducked up underneath him, grabbed him, took him to the ground, and choked him. And then Martin was like, "Coach, was I getting hit?" I'm like, "You don't remember a lot of this fight, but yeah, you were getting hit."
That was that night, though, man. I was at the and what's crazy is we stumbled into the Arnold Classic. We all went up, got a room, and we went out to Nationwide that morning just to walk around. Well, somehow we end up getting like turned around and meeting Rashad Evans on the street. And I said, "Man, that's Rashad Evans right there." And like, I'm on the phone with my brother and I'm like, "Hey man, do you care? Nice to meet you. Do you care to talk to my brother for a second?" So I put him on the phone and he's like, "Hey Rocky, this is Rashad." And my brother, I get the phone back real fast because obviously I don't want to aggravate him. And I heard my brother say, "This is effing crazy, man." But we end up getting into the Arnold Classic, and like Mikey Burnett walks up. Nobody's, like realizing who he is. And I'm with him. I'm like, "Man, he was out of the Lions Den." And I go up, talk to him, and I'm talking to Wes Sims, who trained with Randy that fight. And I'm like, "Dude, do you think he's got a chance?" He said, "If he treats us, if he treats Tim Sylvia like he's treated us in training, he's going to leave here with the belt tonight."
Oh, absolutely. Nobody expected that inside cut kick to the overhand right. And Tim doesn't remember. He concussed Tim Sylvia that night. Tim doesn't remember from the first round on of any of that fight. And Randy, he was a guy who just stuck to his game plan. And it was one of the few times he's like, "Coach, my hands hurt from punching this dude in the face," because he was really trying to punch him in the face, not just set up takedowns. And it was just a spectacular night, and one I was so honored to be a part of.
You did a wonderful job, Ron, because let me tell you something. His head movement was unlike. He was, up and under. His feints were beautiful. He put on a masterful performance. And a lot of that is, you were the boxing coach, man. And that showed me right there that, like I said, with Randy, he always surrounded himself with the best in the business, people he believed in. And he always, 90% of the time came away with an excellent performance.
Absolutely. And my only regret is that I wish Randy could have got some do-overs for some of the earlier fights in his career.
Yeah.
Because the Randy I met that was 40 years old was much better than an earlier version of Randy. And so a couple of those losses that he had, that if he could have done those over, he beats those guys. And with the Chuck Liddell fight, the funny thing is, we came into that camp going, "All right, Chuck, the way he circles and the way he likes to throw his overhand, do not throw a lead left hook.
Yeah.
We're going to go behind our jab. We're going to throw right hands. We'll throw overhands to the shot. Don't throw a lead left hook." Well, if you notice the ending sequence, Randy was about to throw a right hand. He slips on the mat, gathers himself, throws the lead left hook, which we didn't want. got countered over the top of it, and obviously Chuck went on to win that fight and win 2 of the 3.
Yeah.
But all right, now we're gonna go back a little bit. JSEC, which is now Fight Capital, Chuck Liddell, John Lewis was Chuck's jiu-jitsu grappling coach.
Yeah.
So I actually met Chuck before I started training Randy. And I would give Chuck a hard time. Like, Chuck, you always in and out of here. You never bring me anything. So one day he comes in and he throws me this navy blue Iceman Chuck Liddell t-shirt. And I'm like, great, that's all I need is another free t-shirt. Throw it in my backpack. Don't think anything about it. I am not a family man at the time. I'm a single guy. So fast forward, I think 7, 8 months later, I am now training Randy to face Chuck for the 3rd time. Well, we are training at the Ultimate Fight Gym when they didn't have anything going on, when production was shut down. Well, Randy, it's a Wednesday. Randy says, "Hey, boss, I am not going to be training tomorrow. I have a photo shoot to do in Los Angeles." I'm like, all right. Well, me being the bachelor, and I'm like, man, I haven't washed clothes in a while. I don't have any clothes. Oh, I have this navy blue Chuck Liddell t-shirt and some navy blue Nike sweats. Like, none of the other bozos will notice that I'm wearing a Chuck Liddell t-shirt because it's laundry day. Halfway through our session, who walks into the gym? Randy. "Oh, they canceled my photo shoot." Looks at the shirt, it's like, "Oh, I guess I know whose side you're on." And they're like, "I'm never living this down, am I?" Like, nope, never living that down.
Man, well, after the 3rd fight, the feeling in the locker room had to be heartbreaking. Fast forward a year later, what was that feeling like in Columbus after he won with you guys?
It was exhilarating. It was heartbreaking because we thought that was the end.
Yeah.
Coming into what most people don't know, probably going into the start of training camp, Randy said he was going to retire. This was going to be his last fight. Obviously, he had some. I think he was going through his 2nd divorce at the time, or that was finalized. So just turmoil. Everything was kind of unsettled in his personal life, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue on. He had other options. So he said, "Yeah, I'm probably going to retire, and I want to open up some gyms." So, okay, so he loses that. So we thought that was it. So everybody, a lot of people are crying in the locker room. He meant so much to so many people
Yeah.
that it was like, yeah, we were just devastated. Like, no, this is not the way we wanted to go. Like, he's cheering. This is who he is. He's telling everybody else it's going to be okay. So all the guys, I remember Nate Corey coming back, Andrei Arlovsky, just a lot of the early date gladiators of the UFC were coming, Forrest Griffin. A lot of those guys are in the locker room, and we're crestfallen. We're heartbroken because we're like, this is it. And then he's consoling us, going, "No, it's going to be all right." And then right before Xtreme Couture opened, he decided he was going to come out of retirement and face Tim Sylvia. And actually, we were training in the gym when there was nothing but a big cage, no flooring, some cancer-causing heat mechanism we had. Not to make light of that. Just I was like, this can't be healthy stuff we're breathing in right now. And it was cold. January 1st, 2007. We were in the gym training. I believe we opened to the public 6 weeks later. A lot of the fighters, a lot of the OGs, we call them Mike Powell, Forrest, and those guys, Martin, Jay Haran, Tyson Griffin. We laid flooring down in the gym. We laid flooring. We put the stuff together, and that's kind of the beginning of Xtreme Couture. And then Randy went on to beat Tim Sylvia and kind of set the bar for the gym that Eric Nixick has taken over now over the last, I think 6 years, 7 years that he's been at the helm. And obviously Francis Nagano and many other champions are in that gym today.
That is so awesome, man. And you guys have left a great legacy with that gym. Like you said, to have top notch, the early guy laying flooring, getting it ready, it's got that brotherhood feel to it. Just the story of how it came about. And it seemed like, didn't Tap Out start right after that for you? Didn't they Tap Out open a gym and they wanted you to come in and do for them?
They had a gym which is literally about a half a mile away from Xtreme. And uh, Originally, okay, let's back up a little further because it's all 6 degrees of separation. So, right when before Randy retired, um, he decided he was going to have an IFL team. So originally, Randy was supposed to have an IFL team. That fell through. Some things were going on that he didn't like about it. A lot of litigation and stuff went back and forth, and he decided, like, nah, this is not for me. I don't want to be involved in that. So Boss Rutan ended up taking over that team. Well, 3 of the 5 guys, or 4 of the 5 guys, were my fighters. So Boss Rutan and Sean Tompkins, the late Sean Tompkins, which was one of his coaches, uh, decided to make me one of the assistant coaches. So I got to work under Boss Rutan, work alongside of Sean, and that was the IFL team, the Los Angeles Anacondas, which most of those dudes trained out of Xtreme Couture in Vegas. They would spend a couple weeks down there, but most of their time with me, and that's how that came about. And it just from that, a lot of relationships grew and blossomed, and we became intertwined from there. So Chuck Liddell and all those guys, and Randy and Chuck are actually friends. I just saw Chuck at Randy's event for round 11 of the amateur fights that they put on with Tough Enough out here. Chuck was one of his guests, so it's all crazy.
That's one thing I always admired about those two, because it wasn't, like they didn't have to sell a fight due to them trash talking or anything. They sold the fight of who, because of their styles, who they were, and what they meant to the sport. And that's something that it's hard to do, because you've got guys that's doing everything in the world to talk, and that's part of the game. You've got, a lot of guys want to do that to sell, but those two never had to do that. It was a mutual respect between two guys that were top of the line, contrasting styles. It was the best trilogy, in my opinion, in the sport, still to this day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're just good guys who went out there, and obviously Randy just had that uh, all American guy. I'm just an average Joe, but if you get me in this cage, I might throw you over the top of it,
Yeah.
kind of dude. And obviously, and Chuck was just like, this dude could knock out anything. He could knock out King Kong if given the opportunity. And those were guys that they would fight anyone, and you knew that. And it wasn't any animosity. They just loved the challenge of it all. Unlike some of the other guys, like I thought Tito. Well, I thought Tito was very good for the sport. I thought he never wanted any part of Randy or Chuck, and
Oh,
you
he
could
didn't.
tell going into those fights that he didn't believe he could beat those guys because he couldn't.
And when Chuck, Chuck dealt with him the way that everybody thought Chuck would deal with him. He stopped him in two, and then when he fought Randy, Randy absolutely. I guess the crowd probably thought Tito would win that fight, and Randy beat on him for 5 rounds. I mean,
Oh
spanked
yeah,
him.
just yeah. They literally spanked him at the end, and then and Tito's like, "Oh, Randy tapped. How did he tap, bruh? He
Yeah, if you go
spanked
back
you
and
like
watch
a
it when
baby.
he's spanking him,
Like,
you can see what a
yeah,
Tito corner man pointing.
yeah, like he tapped for what? Beating you up? He was tired of beating you up? Is that what he tapped from? Like, yeah. But yeah, that they were just those type of guys, and I kind of liked the UFC a little bit better than I do today. Not that they're fantastic fighters today; they have technology, they put in a lot of work, but I just thought that era of fighters, they were special. They were like rock stars.
Yeah.
When you got Matt Hughes or George St. Pierre or the early Anderson Silva days, because you didn't see or Randy or Chuck or Vitor, you didn't see those guys fight every Thursday. So
Yeah.
when they fought, it was special.
Right.
And
It's
you could
watered
feel,
down.
yes, it is. And you can feel the energy when those guys fought.
You can think of
Now,
someone like Evan Tanner, who meant a lot for hardcore fans, and for Evan
yes,
Tanner to have been on a card, that would have sold me. Like you said, that
yeah,
era was special. They were different. I guess it was more genuine. You feel like,
yeah, it's just so many fights right now. I mean, you have the UFC who have 3 or 4 fights every year. I mean, every month. I'm sorry. Bellator has 2 or 3 fights every month. You have the PFL, they have fights. You have one championship, they have fights. And so sometimes I'm looking at some of the fighters and I'm going, who is this?
Yeah.
And why are they on pay-per-view? Like some of them, I personally think are not ready. The matchmaker, they do the best they can with what they got, and sometimes they get fabulous fights, and sometimes they get guys you go, I don't know his name, and I don't want to know.
Right. Yeah, we'll go to the concession or we'll go to the refrigerator. My brother would always call the prelims, the ones he didn't watch, he'd call them the refrigerator fights because we'd always write them down. He said, I'm
Yes,
going to go smoke a cigarette during this refrigerator or bozo fight. But,
yes.
to get away from that, Ron, something that I've been keeping up with you a little bit we got a little bit in common. You on a very higher level is you've got your own gym going and you work the people out. You've got awesome workouts. And I kind of work local kids out and people that want to do some MMA work and stuff here. And how long have you been doing that, man? Because like I said, you've got it going on.
Oh, well, what I do is PhD Athletics is my own brand, my own company, but I kind of buy time from Xtreme Couture. So I train all of my people out of Xtreme Couture, though they contractually they're with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's just great. I've been doing that for a long time. I just wanted to put all the stuff I've learned over the years to use. And I wanted to do it at my own time and my own pace. And I didn't necessarily always want to train fighters. I love fighters. I love boxers. I love MMA guys. Don't necessarily like the business all that much. The
Yeah.
business can be a bit much at times. And to really do this at its highest level, you have to be willing to travel. And once my daughter hit a certain age, I didn't want to be gone 2 or 3 weekends out of every month. I don't want to be traveling from being in on the East Coast for 5 days, coming back home for two, going to Hawaii for 5 days, coming back home, going to Japan for a week, coming back home, going to Canada for a week, coming back home, and then going to England or parts unknown. And I was like, I'm missing too much. And then if I can't be there and in the corner for the fighters, then I shouldn't be with them. Like I don't want to be that main voice in your camp and I'm not at your fight. And so I was trying to balance training people and then the fight business and then being a dad, which is the most important title I'll ever have in my life.
Amen.
And I just wanted to be there for my daughter and be able to support her career in dance. She's only 13, but she's a competition dancer, and I get more nervous watching her compete than I ever did on the pay-per-view with Randy or Forrest or anybody else. And I get a lot of anxiety when those dudes fought. But when my little girl performed, I'm like, oh my god, I don't know if I'm gonna make it through this. So
Oh, I'm the same. I've
yeah,
got a
so
little
I
boy that
decided
plays basketball, and I'm the same way, man. I
yeah,
mean, it's
yeah. So
it's a different feeling when they're out there than like you said when you were doing your own thing.
yeah, because I can control elements of when I was doing it. When she's doing it, I'm just there, rooting her on, hoping she does her best. And I just wanted more time for that. So basically, start training just regular people, and then throw in some fighters every now and again, and other professional athletes. I'm out there with Sean Merriman, who's a former San Diego Charger, outstanding linebacker, trying to make sure he doesn't punch me in the face because he is 6'6", 275 pounds.
A big
Not trying
dude.
to have. Yes, he is a big boy. Actually, it's funny because I'm not necessarily a big guy, but I'm not little either.
Right.
I'm like 210 pounds. I'm like 6'1", and he makes me look so small when I'm hitting mitts with him. I'm like, this is just weird, man. Like, stop.
Well, Ron,
And
you have had an excellent, I mean, a good journey, dude. I mean, you've got to do some cool stuff, and it's led from basketball into boxing. Before we get off here, I'd like to ask you a couple questions.
all right.
Who is your three favorite boxers of all time?
Oh, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones.
Great choices, man. Roy Jones is Roy Jones in the '90s was one of the most fun fighters to watch, dude.
Oh my God, he was so gifted. He was just so freakishly athletic. I just loved watching him fight. I loved the way he challenged himself. And actually, Roy hurt himself by staying up at head. People don't know the story. people think Roy got a glass jaw or something like that. And I always laugh at like Roy first knockout loss was year 14 of his career. And you never saw him hurt at middleweight and super middleweight. But when he fought John Ruiz, he weighed 199 pounds with 4% body fat. Mackie Shieldstone was his trainer. Remember talking to Mackie before the fight. He was in negotiations after that fight to fight Mike Tyson. People don't know that. Mike was obviously had his issues with Don King, was getting ready to sue Don King. He said, I'm not giving Don any more of my money because Don had already taken a lot of Mike's money. There might have been an incident where somebody threw somebody down some stairs. I'm not going to say who threw whom down some stairs. Anyway, but that fell through. That fight ended up falling through. Then he was in negotiations to fight Evander Holyfield. From my understanding, Evander asked for more money than HBO was willing to pay him at that point in his career. Then all of a sudden, HBO said, "Hey, you got to fight in 6 weeks. We got a date for you, and you got to fight, Antonio Tarver, and you got to fight him at light heavyweight." And he was weighing 199 pounds with 4% body fat, and he had to go all the way down to light heavyweight. And he did that, and he didn't look good. He won the fight, but he didn't look good getting down there, and he shouldn't have fought him again, or he should have fought him at a heavier weight, and I think he would have had a different result, but he didn't. And once he got knocked out, the one thing when you're like a Roy Jones or a Thomas Hearns or any of these devastating knockout artists, when they lose and they get knocked out in the process, they lose what we call that cloak of invincibility. And that means, and Mike Tyson, that means people now see them as human and vulnerable, and that I can get this guy. So that fear that people had of them is gone, and now it makes them easier to beat. Still very difficult, but easier to beat once that happened. And then Sugar Ray Leonard, he came along in the Olympics, just the speed. Had Angelo Dundee in his corner, so he was kind of the pint-sized version of Muhammad Ali. And so I just fell in love with the darling of the Olympics. And Ali, even though I caught him late in his career, I just fell in love with the man. And he was meeting him in my dad's restaurant. He was just such a good man that I was like, man, you can't get any better than this.
I take my son down to Louisville to James Dixon, TKO Top Notch Boxing, and his son Carlos Dixon's doing really good right now. And where I'm from on the other East Kentucky, man, it's total different culture down here. So when we go out to James' gym, I mean, it is intense, and he trains UFC fighters, he trains really good boxers, and just getting my kid down there once a month or once every few months, he works with him for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and to get that much work from somebody, a legitimate boxing coach, man, it is awesome. And we go over to the Muhammad Ali. Have you ever been to the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville?
I have not, because the last time I was in Louisville, I was catching a basketball game and it hadn't been built yet. But that is on my list of things to do. The next time I get out that way is to stop by.
Ron, let me tell you something. It is unreal. Like, there's 3 stories. You could spend a whole day in there. It is that good. Like, I want to plan a trip to go back because I feel like we didn't even get to see to experience it as much as we could. We got to experience everything, but you would be blown away. I mean, this is unbelievable. It should be. I mean, it should be promoted a whole lot more, I think, than it is.
Yeah, there's not a DVD, fight, a book, or anything that's been written or filmed about Muhammad Ali that I have not seen. So I definitely, before my life ends, I definitely have to get to that center and check it out. That's definitely on my bucket list of things to do.
You would love it. All right, top 3 favorite MMA fighters.
Ooh, okay. This has to be guys I have not coached.
Okay, got you.
Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Oof. Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson.
Demetrius Johnson. Oh man,
Yeah.
Anderson Silva is, to me, he is the Ali of mixed martial arts, man. And I met him. I met him. That's funny. You know, when we went up to UFC 68 when Randy beat Tim Sylvia, Anderson Silva was with Nate Marquardt, Keith Jardine doing like a promotional thing. So
Yes.
I get to meet him and I take my shirt off and I said, "Do you care?" You know, because I didn't know that he could speak English because every time I'd
Yes.
seen him, he had an
Yes.
interpreter. So I'm like trying to say, can we take a picture? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I'm like, huh? So he was
And
just the nicest guy that I had ever met. And then to watch him, and he was an absolute killer in the cage. Like I'll never
yes,
forget when he fought Chris Lieben in his debut. He threw like 20 punches and landed 23. It was the most craziest thing I'd ever seen.
that funny thing you mentioned that fight. So, I had watched Anderson in Pride, and when they said he was fighting Chris Lieben, I was like, "Oh, he's gonna kill this kid." Now, having said that, everybody in my camp is from Oregon for the most part, and Chris Lieben had ties to Randy. I mean, we trained at Quest,
Yeah.
so everybody in my camp is, "Oh, Chris is gonna get him." I'm like, "No, this dude is different. Y'all don't understand." And for some reason in Pride, I remember watching one of the fights and they had Anderson listed at 5'11". I'm like, that's
I seen
strange
the
because he
same
looks,
thing.
yeah, I was like, he looks taller than that, but I had never met him. Well, we were at a gym here in Vegas, and Anderson Silva comes in to hit. This is before the Lehman fight, like a week before, and he's hitting Mitch with his trainer, and he walks by me, and I'm like, that dude is 6'2". He's taller than me. Then I
Yeah.
watched his sharpness and crispness on the mitts, and I was like, oh yeah, he's killing Chris. Yeah, yeah. And so I bet all my guys and took their money. They were so mad at me. And then I just saw an interview with Chris Lieben, and they asked him what's the hardest he ever been hit, and he's like Anderson Silva hit me with some knees, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably the hardest I've ever been hit. And then uh, Anderson goes on to fight Forrest Griffin. All right, so he beats Forrest. The next day, we're getting into the shuttle. Now the shuttle leaves at like 5 in the morning to take us back to the airport. I get in, and who's already in the shuttle? Anderson Silva. He looks at me. He's like, "Coach, you're still a great coach." I'm like, "Don't be nice to me. I'm trying to be mad at you, bro. You beat my guy, man." He's like, yeah, we laughed, but he's always treated me with the utmost respect. Always been super nice to me every time I've run into him. So yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite fighters. And uh, GSP, another just really nice guy. Every time
Mhm.
I've ever met him, he came into Randy's a couple times, just shook it out with his people, and just super nice, super cordial guy. And then Demetrius Johnson, I met him and his trainer Matt Humes, and they've always shown me nothing but respect and love. So those are three of my favorites that I never coached, because I will never say who's my favorites that I coached.
Well,
They're like
last
your kid.
question, Ron. If you were going to a fight, if you were coming out to the boxing ring, or if you were coming out to the cage, what theme song would you choose for your walkout?
Oh, Ambition as a Rider, Tupac. That's what we're rolling with coming down that aisle. I know
Awesome.
he switched it up for Mike Tyson, but Ambition as a Rider, Tupac would be my theme song going into that ring. And I love boxing. I love MMA. I know there's always been this rivalry between the two sports, but what I think a lot of both MMA fighters and boxers are learning now is that one, there's room for everybody. There's enough money for everybody to eat, but it's hard doing both sports. It's
Mhm.
extremely hard to be a world champion boxer. It's extremely hard to be a world class, world champion MMA fighter. And they both deserve the respect of how hard it is to do this craft.
You hit the nail on the head, man, because like you said, and it's a shame that most of our MMA guys are getting into boxer later on into their career because it's Anderson. What Anderson's close to 50, and he could give the new guy Jake Paul all he wanted. I mean, if
Yeah,
they,
and you know what? I mean, we talk a lot about that because everybody criticizes Jake Paul. And Jake Paul is actually, and this is what I give him credit for. One, he's not shortchanging the game in this. He trains real hard. He's got legitimate coach. His coach fought for the cruiserweight title once upon a time. He has legitimate sparring partners. He's improving, but Jake has only been boxing like a little under 4 years. If he was 12 years old and he was getting it started at 12 and he was 16, he would just be fighting open amateurs. So, fighting some of these other guys in combat sports who has a little bit of boxing but a lot more experience than him is the guys he's supposed to be fighting. And Anderson Silva, yeah, he's supposed to fight. That's a test for him to see where he's at. But he should be the Anderson Silva because Anderson is great with kicks and knees, but he's never been a one-hitter quitter in the cage. He had great speed, and he kind of overwhelmed people with speed, but his knees were his most powerful punch, not necessarily his fist. And, uh, so hats off to Jake for that. There's a lot to probably criticize him for, but he's not shortchanging the game. And I think that's what a lot of people think he is, but he's not. And for young fighters, he's kind of showing you a new way of doing business. You cannot promote yourself with promoters and promotions like they did in the 80s and 90s in 2022. Build your brand. I like what Sugar Sean O'Malley's doing. Be a gamer. Get a YouTube channel showing you doing something other than training. Show your personality. If you like to cook, show that. If you like to paint, show that. If you can sing, do that. Get people invested in you, then they'll invest in your pay-per-view.
Bingo. And they feel like they can identify with you. You'll get a different fan base, a whole lot of fans that will tune in to shell out that money also by doing that.
Absolutely. I trained for a brief 6 months period of time, Paige Van Zandt. And what I learned about Paige in that 6 month time, maybe not the most skilled person I've ever trained, but that girl is tough.
Yeah.
She is tough. I remember her fighting in Invicta, and Boss Rudin and King Mo were doing the commentator. I worked under Boss in the IFL, and I had trained King Mo a little bit. And in between rounds, as I was going to sit back down, they both put their hand over their mics and looked at me and said, "Coach, that girl is tough." And you can't teach that. You can teach skills, but you can't teach toughness. And you just kind of have to find your own lane. She did the Dances with the Stars stuff, and now she's doing other things because professional athletics, no matter what level it's at, it's all going to stop one day.
Yeah.
You might be fortunate enough, and if you're very fortunate, you could be like the late Kobe Bryant or LeBron James, and you can play 20 years. Or if you're fortunate enough to be like Randy and start late at 32 and end at 47, you still got a lot of life left to live after that. And being in a brutal sport like boxing or MMA, hopefully you maximize how much money you can make so you can live a comfortable life after these sports are over.
Perfectly said, my man. And like I said, I don't want to have you on here too long because you've got a busy schedule, and we hit it pretty good, man. Heck, we've had a heck of a show, if you ask me. And there was still stuff. Listen, I'm gonna get you on for a part 2 later on down the road because we still didn't get to talk about your time in the Ultimate Fighter, getting to be on that show and help Rashad and those guys also. So we'll save that for a sequel on down the road if that's cool with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could go. Oh, I got some definitely juicy tidbits about the Ultimate Fighter. You'll love those.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ron, I've got a good feeling that a lot of people's going to tune in, like this, and demand you back. Listen, thanks for being on a Wild Time podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you on. I've always admired what you did for the fighters. Your story is killer. I mean, going overseas, playing basketball, I mean, these people are going to have a lot to sink their teeth into on this. So, Ron Frazier, thank you for being on, my man.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. And I love this. I could talk all day, and I love the fighters. I've been very blessed in the guys I've been able to work with. They've been tremendous. From Rico Rodriguez, who's really talented guy who actually just hit me up last week just to say, hey, good guy, to Randy and Vandalay and Vitor, and Randy's son Ryan, who I got to train a little bit as an amateur, and Johnny Hendricks, who I was at the start of his career, and Gray Maynard and Jay Haran, Mike Pyle, Forrest Griffin, the late Stephen Bonner. I got to hold mitts for him a couple times. Just I can go on and on and on about how fortunate I've been in this game. It's been very good to me, and I hope I've been good to it.
Well, and to have you to just humbly acknowledge that it means that you appreciate it, and the game's appreciated you, and it's been an honor to have you on, like I said, and hopefully, in the springtime we may do a part two. We get you your hind end back on here, and we'll talk about that Ultimate Fighter house, what you've been up to, and like I said, thank you for being on, Ron.
Thank you for having me, and yeah, anytime.
All right, take it easy, my man. Guys,
All right.
Ron Frazier, one of the baddest dudes around. Keep on. Listen, we're going to be doing some amazing things, more guests. Keep subscribing, keep hitting that like button, and we will see you on down the road.